Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm super excited because we have the beautiful Kelly Brogan, Dr. Kelly Brogan, here with us today. As you remember her from HEAL, we are continuing the conversation, which I think is a very important one, on mental health, anxiety, and depression. And so hopefully today we can, help guide people in the right direction of what steps to take, beyond the film. So, Kelly, welcome.
Total pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. So you are a holistic psychiatrist. You're a transformed psychiatrist. You want to give us like the 2-minute background of why you practice differently today?
I'm in recovery. Recovery from my training. Yeah, no, I mean, listen, the one-liner is that I used to believe that, diseases were what we're told they are, and that they require relatively urgent medical interventions. And so I, set about to becoming a dyed-in-the-wool doctor, psychiatrist, totally believed in the pill-based model, and I took a massive radical left turn for the same reasons that most doctors do, because I personally had an experience that showed me the deficiencies and real bankruptcy of that model. And when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which I'm sure most of your know is an autoimmune condition, I recognized, that conventional medicine literally had nothing to offer me, and I didn't want to take a pill for the rest of my life. So it was through my own healing journey and my passion for the published literature and science have always been a data nut. And I sort of hit the books after I had that experience. I was like, what else did they not tell me? And I spent years just, tearing through the primary literature and teaching myself everything that I hadn't been taught. And I changed my practice, and I have the best job on the planet, actually, today. It's just it's a magical space that I get to traffic in, witnessing people heal.
Awesome. Thank God for you. We need more doctors like you, and they're out there. It's all moving in the right direction. So you have a download on your website that I think is going to be intriguing to a lot of people. That's 7 facts about depression that will blow you away. Yeah. Can you give us 2 or 3 of them, and then, they can go to your website and download the rest, but 2 or 3 facts about depression that will kind of blow our minds.
So one is pretty basic, but it's very primary to pretty much everything we'll probably talk about today, which is that depression is not a disease. Okay. So there's literally nothing about the nature of depression that is consistent with the characterization of a disease. And we've been told, it's something you're probably born with. My aunt has it, my uncle had it, my grandmother committed suicide, so obviously I'm at risk, right? So we've been sort of entrained around this concept that it's a genetic disease that involves somehow, some way, some kind of chemical imbalance in the brain, and that you need to take medications ongoing for life just to manage it. That it would be irresponsible not to do so, right? Especially if it's severe, serious. And, what I discovered after I went down the rabbit hole I just referenced, through my own healing process, was that in literally 6 decades of medical literature, there is not a shred of evidence to support the fact that depression is a serotonin imbalance, right? Which is what most of us have come to believe, largely because we live in one of 3 countries that allows for direct-to-consumer advertising from the very companies that are going to profit from selling you a story about your disease, right? So first they sell the disease, then they sell the pill. And so this was a big aha for me, because I had I've been very interested in pharmacology and in neuroscience. I was a neuroscience major at MIT. I've studied the brain pretty extensively, and I thought, that it had something to do with serotonin, and maybe we don't know exactly what yet. But in a deeper dive, I discovered that even the researchers themselves from the hallowed halls of the National Institute for Mental Health have abandoned this notion of the chemical imbalance theory of depression. They've actually themselves for 20 years been researching what's called the cytokine theory, which is the inflammatory model. And that's a second point I'll share, which is that, so if depression isn't a disease, it's not a serotonin deficiency, it's not your broken brain, then what is it? And this is where we have to look at it as a symptom. Right? So think of it like a fever. And if a fever is evidence that the body's working on something, right, then we still have to figure out what is causing it, what's driving it, and then what's the best way to intervene based on that investigative process, right? So depression can be anything from, and I talk a lot about these common reversible drivers, right? So it can be anything from low thyroid function, or thyroid imbalance. What I was diagnosed with, for example, Hashimoto's, is extraordinarily common, but the diagnosis is not likely to come from a routine physical, right? So you have to know, what labs to check. It's not rocket science, but, it would be absolutely the first and most important thing I would look into before even thinking about medication, right? So could it be a thyroid imbalance? Could it be a reaction to a medication? This is what I've devoted a lot of my activism to, is raising awareness around the untold adverse effects of pharmaceutical products. They have a lot of reason to make sure that you don't take these concerns seriously or that you don't know about them at all. And so,
side effects.
Yeah, and right. And it's like the micro machine voice at the end of the commercial.
Yeah.
But the truth is that they are, not as rare as you think. They're more extensive than you think. And if you don't know to connect the dots, let's say between your birth control pill or your acid blocking pill or even your antibiotic and your mental health symptoms, then you're going to think, oh, now I have another disorder that I need to see a specialist for and I need to take another medication for. But if you know that that's a possible, correlation, then you'll be able to make the clear-eyed decision about whether you want to stop the medication and see how you feel. So that's another common one. Blood sugar is like a majorly common driver of all sorts of mental illness, so to speak, right? Ranging from panic attacks, literally, from panic attacks to diagnoses of ADHD, to sleep issues, to chronic fatigue. We are not meant to be eating the way that we are eating, and so nothing is wrong with your body. It's just telling you to stop, and this is the way it tells you through these swings in energy and concentration, through headache and irritability, through massive anxiety, racing heart, in the sense that you're like something bad is about to happen. That's what low blood sugar feels like. And so if you're eating things that most people eat, bagels and bread and pasta, and that's sort of how you're buoying yourself through your day, throwing a little caffeine, a little alcohol, then this is it's a recipe for what's called dysglycemia, and it's reversible in literally 10 days to 2 weeks. So it's important to think about that. Another one is common foods that are now, we're learning in the literature, are driving a lot of different mental illnesses, including things we think are, well, of course, genetic, like schizophrenia, right? Which is the incidence of what's called food antigenicity. So things like wheat or dairy, in processed foods that are literally driving abnormal behavior and that are totally obviously reversible when you eliminate them. So that's another sort of, I would say, big take home, is that if we look at depression as just a sign that something is up and nothing more, then you have to go on your investigative journey to figure out what it's trying to tell you, right? That there is a meaning, that the body doesn't make mistakes, and that our sense of offness is not wrong, right? That it's actually an accurate, depiction of an imbalance internally. I would say those are two big take-homes.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I know. Okay, that's great. So to find out the rest of them, go to kellybroganmd.com and you can download the rest, because those are mind-blowing facts, especially for someone that's, feeling depressed and feeling that they cannot, even if they intellectually know, to think positively. They can't pull themselves out of the dungeon, to connect it to these other things in your life, like gut health or, diet and some of these other things.
And it doesn't have to be overwhelming or complicated, and you don't have to get the answer immediately, right? Like that's why I'm a big proponent of sending the body a signal of safety from like multiple different angles at once, right? So my approach, with my patients is really in service of that. It's to send the body that signal of safety so we see what your baseline is. Like, are you still having a panic attack every 2 hours? Like, are you still up till 3 in the morning? Are you still irritable all day long? Do you still have PMS? So what do you look like at a very neutral baseline when we control for lifestyle factors and we begin to allow that stress response to ease? Then you will know. You will have more information about how more effective. It's more effective than it is to endure, the effects of medication, which is a whole other conversation about how complex that can be.
Yes, exactly. So you wean people safely off medication. What does that look like? So for people listening right now that are on depression meds, because people have written in, they're on, 3 or 4 different medications. What does that process look like? And how do you do it? How did you come up with the safe way to wean people off meds?
Yeah, it was through trial, because we don't learn about this in our training. And I never had a mentor teach me. I learned everything I know from people in the trenches who have done, literally patients who have done this on their own. So I guess they wouldn't be considered patients, because there are millions of people online who are discussing how difficult to the point of being a kind of hell coming off of these medications can be. And if you had not been there, you wouldn't believe it. But it doesn't, in my opinion, have to be that way. And I only figured that out, through my own process with patients. I began to dedicate my practice to taking people off of medication safely only after I read a book called Anatomy of an Epidemic, which completely changed my life. And essentially what this book by investigative journalist Robert Whitaker demonstrates, I think, in totally beyond, any further debate, is that all psychotropic medications, all of them, meaning like anti-anxiety ones, ADHD ones, mood stabilizing ones, antipsychotics, it's a long list, that in fact, when you look at the non-industry funded literature, you will find evidence for the way that these medications perpetuate, exacerbate, and really like propagate exactly what they claim to be treating and resolving. It's a wild claim, right? But he provides, an entire book's worth of data, by the way, none of which I had ever heard about in my Ivy League training, not one of these studies, and I was a study reader. So that was pretty curious to me and piqued my interest. And the more that I would dig, the more I would find evidence for things like tardive dysphoria, which is literally the clinical name for the ongoing chronic depression that you experience when you take an antidepressant, right? So that there might be an initial chemical effect, like any chemical, right? That could be, take alcohol, for example. It could be adaptive. The initial effect could be something that feels good to you or different enough to be good, right? But that after even a couple of months, you're entering into a realm where your body is adapting to this chemical stressor, really, and it develops like a new normal, and you are more susceptible to the very symptoms that you were hoping to resolve chronically over time. And moreover, that people actually become more disabled over time. And that was his, theory, hypothesis he was exploring was, why do we have more and more people who have access to these medications and more people simultaneously who are disabled by their mental health condition? Like, shouldn't the medications be reducing disability? What's up with that? And so he explores that, and I was so profoundly impacted by this. Remember, I had just healed myself, right? So I was open to having, perhaps been exposed to some myths in my training. And I was so impacted by this that I never started a patient on medication ever again to this day. And I devoted my practice to helping people come off. But I learned shortly thereafter that I had no idea what I was doing, and it was a nightmare. I was literally like running an outpatient rehab with people who had to be on medical disability because of how disturbed they were physically, by the taper process. And so it was then that I sort of like put two and two together, and I said, okay, how did I heal myself? Maybe we can drain their bucket, so to speak, of accumulated stressors so that their nervous system can adapt back in the way it only knows how after we're removing the medication slowly from their system. And that was really, when I landed on what seems to be working for actually now thousands of people. But it's not complicated, but it requires a degree of preparedness and readiness, and also, this will not surprise you, or your tribe, a belief, like a deep held belief that there is something amazing awaiting you on the other side of that medication taper.
Ooh.
Yeah. That's critical piece.
So I think it is just so important because, again, the documentary's intention was awareness so that people can be empowered and not victims, So I think it's so important that your experience that you're sharing is you aren't taught these things in medical schools. And even now we're finding that medical school programs are being funded by pharmaceutical companies, back-channeled. And so I think it's just important for everybody to know out there that their doctor, even if they have the best of intentions and they came into the field to help people, they might not know, everything that they claim to know. They haven't been given the best and highest information. So just to be aware of that and sit with that, and then, tune back into what you feel is right. That intuition of going, this doesn't feel right. I don't want to be on a medication the rest of my life. I can turn this around, and then seek out people like you that can guide them through that.
Or really do it yourself in community, which is an amazing thing that I have discovered, right? Because like you, my passion, I'm not here to tell anyone what to do, right? I'm not here to tell anyone to stop their meds or take them, don't take them. That's not what I'm doing. Yeah. But I believe passionately in informed consent. And I feel a large degree of remorse about the fact that I didn't have sufficient information to provide my patients with informed consent before I started literally hundreds of people, including many pregnant and breastfeeding women, on psychiatric medications, as you said, thinking I was doing a good thing for them, right? But it's important that people know what their choices are, right? So you need to know that a legitimate choice, if you are struggling with the symptoms of any mental illness, diagnosed or not, as of yet diagnosed, that there is absolutely a legitimate, and I'm doing everything in my power to put this into the peer-reviewed literature, evidence-based alternative option to engage in lifestyle medicine first, not later, not alongside, but first do no harm literally represents this path. And so, while almost 100% of the people I work with have already made the decision to be on medication, it's sort of like, that Maya Angelou quote, like, when you know better, you do better. That was the best choice you could make with the information you have. Now that you have a bit more information, much of which I hope to, help provide, would you make a different choice? And if there's a yes for you, then, here's what that path looks like. And that's why I've devoted a lot of my, effort to just getting, testimonials on video of people who have experienced recoveries that should never be, right? So like totally dogma defying disease disappearance that should never be possible, many of which you sort of showcase in the film. And when you see that that's possible inside yourself, you'll feel either deeply pulled towards that, or you'll say, nah, that's not for me. That's not what I'm experiencing. And then you'll continue, with what's available. I'm guessing that not a lot of the audience we're speaking to today, But listen, you need to do the medicine you believe in, because otherwise you won't get the outcome you're hoping for regardless.
Exactly. So PTSD, do you treat a lot of people, work with a lot of people to heal from PTSD? Because I know that's like usually from an event, a trauma that's re-looping in their head. So I know a lot of people are asking about that. How do you transition people through that so their mind heals?
Yeah. So my bias is around a certain order of operations, but that's by no means to suggest that this is the only way to do it. It's just the way I've done it. Okay. And not only with my, patients, but in my own experience, is that the lowest hanging fruit for self-empowerment is physical healing. It's really the easiest stuff. I mean, I put an autoimmune condition on paper into remission within months. I have people who come to me with lupus, with migraines, with all manner of raging hormonal issues, literally within months. On paper, they are totally in remission. Oh. It's not hard, but it does require a fierce commitment and prioritization, probably beyond one's comfort zone, of self-care. So what I mean by that is, the nutrition piece. Obviously, I feel really passionately about daily stress response management, which, in my approach is 3 minutes a day of meditation, literally 3 minutes, but it must be every day. And, detoxification, because we aren't meant to live in a world that is corrupted to the extent that ours is. So how are you going to deal with that? How are you going to drain your bucket, so to speak, right? And so, I am a proponent of the notorious coffee enema that I learned from my mentor, beloved mentor, Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, who was a pioneer and legend in the holistic cancer realm, and who used this in nutrition to, manifest cases of terminal cancer recovery that have never been matched, literally in medical history. So I became a believer in this detox modality because of him, was taught how to do it, by him. But it's, it's not always necessary. I would say it's a very major contributor for those who are on medication, whose livers are, quite taxed to begin with. But so if you begin with these pillars, then you feel like a sort of agency in your body, a safety in your body, and a sense of control that emerges from feeling well, not dealing with headaches and bloating and, hair loss that comes from that frees, I think, enough energy to begin the next step of what is inevitably a journey, which is to begin to dive in to that 0 to 7, typically, wound, So how do we approach that? And I find, honestly, that people attract, and I think you would agree, that people attract the kind of healer or the kind of modality that's going to work for them.
Exactly.
Whether it's essential oils or some esoteric shamanism or plant medicine or MDMA or whatever it is, they attract an opportunity to engage a kind of healing that is going to allow them to integrate that history in a calm, safe container that will actually render them more whole than whatever would be possible if we're just suppressing the symptoms of PTSD, of course.
Exactly. And that's, a lot of people raise their hands after a screening and they're like, well, how do I find, this person, or how do I access, or, and my answer is always, set your intention. There's a million different modalities and healers and diets, and, you set your intention, you ask the questions, you will attract the right person for you. That's why there's so many different options, because there's just so many different backgrounds and people that, will resonate with different things, so I agree. Yeah. That's so cool. Just, we talk about in the movie in Ayurveda, the first step of disease is accumulation, and we do live in a toxic world. So to drain the bucket, to put in, nutrients that are going to not tax the body, but just replenish the body and start with that baseline strong foundation that frees up, that puts you in that space where you can, heal. Like you said, it's brilliant. It's so simple, but it's brilliant. And you have the Vital Mind Reset program that people can research online. You want to just give a little bit talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so when I started to do this work in the way I've just described, where I prioritized that month basically of hardcore commitment to self-care before we would even touch like a milligram of medication taper, my outcomes started to really skyrocket. And I developed a wait list of over 2 years. It was totally ridiculous. I mean, if I called a doctor and I was like, I want an appointment, and they were like, sorry, it's going to be 2 years from now, I would feel like quite offended. It was ridiculous. And meanwhile, I knew that it's not rocket science what I'm doing. It's not even that complex or complicated. It's pretty DIY, actually. Okay. The taper necessarily, but the preparation for it, which is everything. And these days, patients are very resourceful and inventive, and people are figuring out how to taper on their own, even, micro tapers, slow tapers. Anyway, so that's not even a barrier itself. But I realized that I had to put this protocol out there. So that's why I wrote a book. Put the whole protocol is in there, all the science to back it up. And I started to create this program even before I wrote the book, because I knew that, I could teach meditations more easily and stuff like that with videos, and it would be, more user-friendly. But I started also a group, a Facebook group at that time. And the outcomes that I get out of Vital Mind Reset, many of which are now in video form, testimonial form on my website, are more extraordinary than the outcomes from people literally paying an order of magnitude more to me to haul themselves to New York City to sit in a room with me. The outcomes are better online. And so this kept happening over and over and over again until I realized two things I think are related to that. One is that I don't provide my patients a community. I haven't pulled it together. I haven't figured out how to do it, and I don't do it. So I actually think that when you are in, even if it's digital, when you are in a community of like minds who reflect back to you your highest potential because they see it, even though you're a stranger, essentially, there's a lot of vulnerability there and a lot of people struggling, but they're reflected back their highest potential. And they also get to see that people survive moving through the birth canal, so the people on the other end are like, hey, it's really awesome over here, keep going, and it I think is a major, major alchemical part of the outcomes that have come from this program. The other piece is perhaps just what happens on a neurosignaling level when you are that in charge, right? So when you can't say, oh, well, Dr. Brogan, such a great doctor, she did it for me. No, you did this, right? You followed the daily instructions and you did this all your damn self. I actually think that there's some power in that. It's like the hyper placebo effect or something like that. It's some great power that comes from feeling that kind of agency, that your nervous system is like, oh, everything's okay now. And that healing is so rapid. I mean, it's really extraordinary how quickly, it can happen. I just got a video from someone who was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, I think probably more than a decade ago. And literally she's showing me in this video herself walking around after 2 weeks of this program in ways that she's never been able to since diagnosis. I don't know anything about muscular dystrophy. That's not what I, treat or am here to do. She did that. And she just did it with a little bit of guidance and a bit of a container that validated her inbuilt potential, to heal when she was ready. It's cool.
So cool. I mean, the program that you've laid out, because you went through it yourself, it's a foundation for any type of healing, muscular dystrophy, mental health, or otherwise. It's our foundation, like detox, thank you so much. I know there's some people out there that wrote in questions. We only had 30 minutes with Dr. Brogan, so I'm sorry if we didn't answer your question specifically, but I felt that she could give a lot of information, and she does offer, Vital Mind Reset in this online community. or this online program that you could go to, and the books that she mentioned, her book, A Mind of Your Own, The Truth About Depression, and then the book by the other fellow, The Anatomy of an Epidemic. So great resources. Thank you so much. It does take, the other thing I love that you said is it takes fierce commitment, which is the opposite of, this victim mindset where, we feel like we're the victim of our genes or heredity so I do want to emphasize, be fierce and commit, because as you pointed out, it can shift can happen really in 2 weeks, 30 days, but give yourself that opportunity of that baseline foundation of a healthy body, and see what happens.
100%. Yeah, it's almost like that's exactly what is being healed, is the victim mindset. And so there should be some degree of discomfort in committing and choosing to change that program. But that discomfort doesn't last long, and the payoff is just massive. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. I know you're a very busy woman.
What a pleasure.
So, yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for everything you're doing. It's an amazing feeling to just have you all standing with me in this space. It's an amazing time we're in.
Yes, I agree. Go team. All right. Take care.
Ciao.